I'm going to live with my lover, so let's get a divorce. Leave the house and car and just get out. Suddenly, I got a call from my husband who was supposed to be on a business trip overseas. He nonchalantly declared he wanted a divorce. However, I wasn't very surprised. He has always considered himself the most important in the family, looking down on me and our sons. Even when he suddenly mentioned having a lover, I thought to myself that he would likely cheat without much guilt. But on the phone, he continued to speak arrogantly, asking if I was surprised and saying he would forgive me if I begged and apologized. I sighed deeply. Then, to inform my unknowing husband of a certain truth, I slowly began to speak. My name is Kelly Norman, a 46-year-old part-time working housewife. I live with my husband Patrick, our eldest son Chris, who is 17 this year, and our younger son David. Chris is busy with his studies for university entrance exams. David, on the other hand, isn't very good at academics but is committed to basketball and dreams of becoming a professional. Both are my precious sons. They have both grown taller than me, and it has been quite a struggle to raise them. I had to juggle a demanding job and household chores right after returning from maternity leave with David. Patrick was unsupportive, both in household and child-rearing duties. If my mother hadn't lived with us to help with childcare and household chores, I would have reached my limit long ago. But back then, Patrick had said, "Aren't you relying too much on your mother? Try to be more conscious of being a mother. Remember, a mother should." He didn't help but lectured me arrogantly. During that time, I was too busy to pay attention to his lectures, but it seems he didn't like my attitude. Once, at his company's barbecue, a colleague said to him, "Your wife has been working hard since returning from maternity leave, right? That's amazing. Not everyone can do that. Nah, she's all about work and hardly manages the home or kids. It's tough, you know." Then a female colleague, clearly exasperated, said, "What are you talking about, Mr. Norman? Your wife was taking care of the kids all the time during the barbecue. You were just enjoying your drink and the barbecue. Why don't you help her out a bit?" Exactly. You know, without any support, she might divorce you. Despite such incidents, Patrick didn't reflect on his behavior and became more problematic over time, increasingly hands-off and all talk. One day, while at work, I received a call from David's school teacher. "What? David has a fever?" "Yes, I understand. I'll come to pick him up." He had a high fever, and they asked me to pick him up. However, I was in the middle of work and couldn't leave immediately as I had an important meeting lined up. I remembered Patrick was off that day and called him to ask him to pick up David. "Huh? I'm busy right now. You're off today, right? Please, go pick him up." I pleaded desperately, but Patrick replied in an annoyed tone and refused. "That's a mother's job. If I go, people will look at me weirdly. Just go yourself." "But I'm busy with work." "Your job isn't that important, is it? Just take some time off and go pick him up." After hanging up abruptly, I was left stunned, holding the phone. Remembering that Chris had finished school in the morning, I quickly called him. "Oh, that's tough. I'll go pick him up." "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of David." After explaining the situation, Chris immediately agreed to help, and I sighed in relief. I didn't want to burden Chris, especially since he was studying for his exams, but I had no choice due to Patrick's attitude. Later, I managed to finish my work early, explained the situation to my boss, and left early. When I got home and went to David's room, both of my sons greeted me. Chris had been taking care of David, preparing soup and medicine for him. "Chris, thank you so much. You've really helped." "No problem. Glad I can help." Smiling at Chris's kind words, I also smiled. David, still lying in bed and looking feverish, said, "Welcome back. David, keep resting." As Chris adjusted David's blanket, I felt tears welling up, seeing how mature he had become. Meanwhile, Patrick had spent the time. You're home early. I'm hungry, make some food. He was just lounging around with his smartphone. From what I heard from Chris, Patrick hadn't helped at all with David's care. Could this really be the father of two? Days later, David's cold had completely healed, and life returned to normal in our household. The only difference was that since the incident with David's cold, the sons had become cold towards Patrick. He doesn't care about me at all. I think I understand a little of what Mom goes through. They said, distancing themselves from Patrick. However, Patrick seemed completely oblivious to this. Moreover, he was in a good mood these past few days because an overseas business trip had been confirmed. The trip would last about half a month. Though it was for work, Patrick seemed completely in a vacation mood, which only added to my exasperation. I have a meeting about the overseas business trip, so I'll be coming home late. He had mentioned this beforehand, but it was concerning that he was coming home late almost every night. When Patrick did come home, it was often while everyone was sleeping, and he never bothered to close the door quietly. Lately, the noise of Patrick returning has been waking me up. Moreover, Patrick seems to be in a bad mood whenever he finds me asleep first. How nice it must be to sleep before a husband who's tired from work comes home. He would say sarcastically. I'm busy with work too, so it should be fine if I sleep first. I thought about arguing back, but it would only make things worse, so I chose to ignore his remarks. One night, knowing that Patrick would be home past 11 p.m., I decided to go to bed early. Just as I was dozing off, suddenly my blanket was ripped away, and my body was roughly shaken. Hey, wake up! Your husband is home. The one who woke me up was Patrick, drunk and with a flushed face. The bedroom was filled with the smell of alcohol, making me cover my nose. Are you drunk? Enough already. I have work early tomorrow. I snapped back, and although Patrick was complaining about something, he was too drunk to articulate, and I couldn't understand him. Then, he just fell face first onto the bed and went to sleep. The next morning, Patrick seemed to remember the previous night. He glanced at the breakfast on the table and said, I don't need breakfast. And quickly left for work. It seemed like a retaliatory act for my snapping back at him the previous night. Our sons, who saw this, looked on in disbelief. What's that about? Is he a child? Mom, can we eat this? Yes, yes, please do. The sons neatly finished the breakfast left behind, thanked with a smile, and energetically went off to school. It was the night before Patrick's overseas business trip. All right, everything's set. Patrick was in a good mood, humming a tune as he prepared. The sons watched him with a detached gaze, apparently fed up with Patrick's recent selfish behavior. Even though Patrick was in the living room, the sons didn't initiate conversation. However, Patrick, completely oblivious to their cold stares, cheerfully spoke to them. I'm going on a business trip overseas. You're fine with me not buying any souvenirs, right? That's fine. We don't need anything. Chris responded calmly, causing Patrick to look a bit irritated. David didn't even glance at Patrick. Saying such cheeky things. What if I don't come back from overseas? I wouldn't want to return to such ungrateful children. It was as if he was trying to gauge the son's affection with his words. I frowned at such a test, something children might do, not something a grown man should do to his children. Perhaps fed up with their father, Chris sighed deeply and turned his face away. David gave Patrick a cold glance and then spoke to Chris. Hey, big bro, I need help with something for school. Sure, let's go to my room. Ignoring their father, the two left the living room. Patrick watched them go, stunned. What's with that attitude? I was about to say. It's your fault. But when Patrick suddenly glared at me, I swallowed my words. Then, he nonsensically accused me. It's your fault for how you've raised them. What? It's your fault they act defiantly towards me. Make sure you educate them properly before I return from my trip. With that, he stomped out of the living room. A week after Patrick left for his business trip, We had a very peaceful time as a family. However, in the middle of the day, while I was at work, I suddenly received a call from Patrick. Hello? Hey. How are you doing? He sounded a bit slurred and very cheerful on the phone, apparently drunk. What do you want? I'm at work. I sighed in exasperation, but Patrick, far from being upset, became even more jovial and said something outrageous. You know what? I'm going to live with my lover from now on, so let's get a divorce. Leave the house and the car and just get out. What? I thought you hadn't noticed, so I'll tell you. I've been cheating for 2 years now. According to Patrick, his business trip was actually a vacation with his lover, not for work. He was currently enjoying a trip at a tropical resort with his mistress. My lover's name is Amy. Unlike you, she's very beautiful. She hasn't given up on being a woman like you, she's kind and considerate, and she's a great girl. Patrick went on and on bragging about his lover Amy, whom I hadn't even asked about. Then, he added insult to injury. It's because you don't care about me that this happened. If you apologize on your knees, I might forgive you. He seemed seriously drunk, but he was serious about his confession. He thought that by confessing while drunk, I would be shocked and comply with his demands. As if that could ever be the case. While I remained silent, Patrick continued to berate me. I cut off his words with a deep sigh. Then, I slowly started to speak, revealing the truth to Patrick, who was oblivious. The house and car are already gone, you know? What? His deflated voice made me almost laugh, but I continued sternly. Why don't you come back and see for yourself? I'm off to work now, so I'm hanging up. Wait. He tried to say something, but I mercilessly ended the call. The next day, after I got home from work and was taking a break, Patrick called again. Hello? There's a for sale sign on my house. And the car is gone too. What have you done? He dove straight into the matter, and I replied, exasperated. What have I done? I just sold my own house. The car is in my name, and I took it to my new place. Huh? Your house? What are you talking about? That's my house. Why did you sell it without asking? Did you not realize? I couldn't believe how clueless my husband was. I decided it was time to explain everything from the beginning. The truth was, the house we had been living in was in my name. We had planned to take a joint mortgage to build the house, but during the credit check, it came out that Patrick had significant debts. Sorry I hid that from you. Sorry? We can't get a mortgage because of this. I said this, dumbfounded, and he apologized again. Can you take out the mortgage in your name alone? I'll definitely contribute to the payments. After his repeated apologies, I agreed, and the house was bought with a mortgage solely in my name, making me the legal owner of both the house and the land. This was before David was born. Initially, Patrick did contribute some money each month, but gradually, his payments delayed and eventually stopped. During this time, I discovered I was pregnant with David. Since I was already paying the mortgage by myself, I had to work even harder after my maternity leave. I begged Patrick repeatedly to contribute to the mortgage payments, and he would always say he understood right after, but he never actually paid. Although I received a living allowance from him, the monthly mortgage payments were a significant burden for me to bear alone. I couldn't rely on Patrick. With Chris and now expecting David, I had to protect our children's future. Back then, I was so focused on safeguarding my children that I had no time to attend to anything else. If I had been less overwhelmed, perhaps I would have pressed Patrick harder to contribute financially. But I was too stretched for time and emotionally drained. Thanks to my hard work post-maternity, I managed to get promoted on time with my peers, which was a small consolation. With each promotion, my salary increased. Once child-rearing eased a bit, I was able to work overtime and earn significantly more. I diligently paid off the mortgage, and a few years ago, I finally managed to pay it off completely. I had planned to live in that house indefinitely, never imagining things would turn out this way. Despite my detailed explanation, Patrick still seemed unconvinced. No way, that's absurd. I'm their father, the breadwinner. Shouldn't the house be in my name as the head of the family? Patrick was under the delusion that being the male head of the family meant the house belonged to him. I sighed heavily but patiently explained again. Then why was I able to sell the house and land? If you were the owner, that wouldn't have been possible, right? But you did that without. A person who isn't the owner can't just sell a property like a house or land. Think about it logically. There was a long silence as Patrick began to grasp the reality of the situation. The car he was fussing about was also in my name and paid for by me. After selling his own car to pay off his debts, Patrick had been using mine. Whenever I needed the car, he had to use a bicycle, and he always complained. Why do I have to ride a bike? He would grumble. If he was so unhappy, he could just buy his own car with his own money, I thought. But perhaps Patrick had assumed my car was his as well. Patrick always looked down on us, treating the family as if we were beneath him. He lived under the assumption that what belonged to the family belonged to him. Dealing with such selfish and distorted thinking made me wonder how I had managed to live with him for so long. As I was contemplating this, Patrick suddenly exclaimed, realizing something. Wait a minute. Why did you sell the house while I was on a business trip? Oh, that. I knew about your affair 2 years ago. Since then, I've been preparing for a divorce. I sold the house because if I continued living there post-divorce, I thought you might stubbornly cling on. I sold it to protect our children and my future. Huh? Patrick raised a pitiful voice. Yes, I had known about Patrick's infidelity all along. One night, 2 years ago, as I was tending to a drunk Patrick who had just returned home, he murmured in his sleep with a blissful smile. Amy, thank you. At that time, Patrick had a big smile on his face and seemed genuinely happy. How many years ago did he show his face like this in front of me? After calling the name of a woman I didn't know, Patrick fell asleep. Normally, one might panic at the thought of their husband possibly cheating. However, I deliberately chose not to pursue it. At that time, my love for Patrick had long faded, so honestly, I didn't care if he was cheating or not. More importantly, pursuing it without solid evidence would likely lead to him lashing out, and I wanted to avoid the hassle. But Patrick eventually slipped up himself. One time, a message from his mistress, Amy, showed up on his smartphone left in the living room, and David witnessed it. Another time, Chris saw Patrick arm in arm with an unknown woman in a cozy manner on his way back from cram school. Both of them quickly realized Patrick was cheating and reported it to me with dismay. Hearing that my sons had witnessed their father's infidelity, I was initially quite flustered. It must be shocking for children to see their father cheating. However, well, I kind of expected Dad might do something like this. I'm surprised, but I'm not really shocked. More importantly, when are you going to divorce? They said nonchalantly, which caught me off guard. After that, I began to gather evidence of Patrick's infidelity during my busy work schedule. It had been a busy couple of years, and it took 2 years after discovering the affair. Patrick was quite careless, but somehow, he believed he had kept his affair hidden. When Patrick heard that my children and I already knew about the affair, he sounded quite flustered over the phone. No way. How did you find out? Well, you were quite careless. I didn't even need to hire a detective, I gathered enough evidence myself. Also, I sold the house while you were on your trip abroad as a bit of revenge for all the bad times you've caused. Evidence was gathered, and just as I was wondering when to bring up divorce, Patrick started talking about a business trip. Patrick, grinning foolishly about the trip, clearly wasn't planning a business trip but a romantic getaway with Amy. Seeing this as the perfect opportunity, I went ahead with the sale proceedings I had already initiated. By the way, we are now living in a temporary apartment. It's located far from our previous home, and it would be difficult for Patrick to find us. Pressed into a corner, Patrick said desperately. Where are you now? I'm coming there. He still doesn't understand the essence of the situation. We no longer consider him family, yet he seems to think we can still be together. Why would I tell you? We're already divorced. Over the phone, I heard Patrick gasp for air. Yes, Patrick and I were already divorced. Previously, we had a big fight. All this work. Cut it out. Aren't you a mother? Take care of the home properly. I was extremely busy at the time, working overtime daily. The children were helping with the housework out of concern for me, but Patrick did nothing as usual. Moreover, he seemed upset that I was busier than him and took his unreasonable anger out on me. Shut up. I manage the housework in whatever little time I have. You can't even take out the trash properly, so don't lecture me. Exhausted, I retorted sharply. Although what I said was harsh, it was nothing compared to the abusive language Patrick had used before. However, Patrick exploded in anger and slapped a filled-out divorce form on the table. How dare you speak to your husband like that? Apologize now. If you don't apologize, it's divorce. Enraged, his face red, he breathed heavily. Seeing him like that, I realized that any further discussion was a waste of time. So, reluctantly, I apologized, but I kept the completed divorce form, thinking it might be useful later. Then, while Patrick was abroad, I signed the divorce form and submitted it. It was accepted without issue, and I was finally free from our marriage. What? Wait. I didn't want to divorce you. To think you can cheat and still say such selfish things. I've been ready to divorce you for 2 years. Patrick's voice trembled as he pleaded to me, but I coldly rejected him. Oh, and I'm not just settling for a divorce. I'm going to claim damages from both you and Amy. What? Thanks to 2 years of diligent evidence gathering, I had already identified Amy's address. She lives in her childhood home with her brother and his wife. She is disliked by her entire family because she barely helps with housework, yet she talks lightly of moving out once she gets married. This information came from Amy's social media posts. She has a habit of posting everything that happens around her on social media. This habit has significantly helped me collect evidence of the affair, but I'll keep that to myself. If she doesn't even check the mail properly because she doesn't do housework, she won't see the certified mail from my lawyer arriving today. Once it arrives, her family will inevitably find out about the affair. I've already instructed a lawyer to claim compensation based on the evidence I've collected. He's highly competent and handled the necessary procedures swiftly. He assured me that the evidence I gathered was sufficient for a compensation claim. This is good news for me, but the worst news for Patrick. What? You hired a lawyer and are claiming damages. Do you understand what you've done? What I've done? I'll simply receive compensation from you and Amy. I'm not troubled by it at all. What? I'm the one who's troubled. If her family finds out because of this, I'll be blamed too. In response to Patrick's panicked shouts, I replied calmly. So what? We're already divorced, and whatever happens to you doesn't affect me or the children at all. Oh, and speaking of the children, I'm taking custody. You've never properly taken care of them, so there's no way I'd leave them with you. Hearing this, Patrick was left speechless. It seems he finally realized he was completely cut off from us. Let me talk to the kids then. Huh? They're there, right? Let me talk to the kids. I glanced to the side. The temporary apartment we were living in was a bit cramped for 3 people, and the boys immediately noticed that I was arguing with Patrick over the phone. At Chris's request, I had put the call on speaker. This meant that all the conversations up to now were heard by my sons. Chris listened to Patrick's words expressionlessly, and David grimaced deeply. As I hesitated whether to let them speak directly, Chris and David looked at me and nodded deeply. Hello, Dad. Chris? Good, you're safe. His tone, as if I had harmed the boys, made me irritable. Chris felt the same and retorted angrily. Safe? We haven't been harmed by Mom at all. In fact, we're really happy since she divorced you. Remember, you're the offender here. Mom and we are the victims. Make sure you understand that." Stunned by Chris's relentless words, Patrick was lost for words. "Hey Dad, did you enjoy your trip abroad with your girlfriend?" "David. You said you wanted to talk to us, but what about? Were you going to say that we need a father, or that we'd be sad without you?" It seemed David had hit the mark, as Patrick let out an inarticulate moan. Disgusted, David continued. "You know, we're not struggling at all without you. In fact, it's a relief. Thinking about not having to live with you anymore makes us look forward to the future." "What?" "I feel the same as David. Living with you, I couldn't concentrate on my entrance exams. We don't need you in our family." After being thoroughly rejected by his sons, Patrick finally broke down and cried. "It's not in my nature to kick someone when they're down, but I needed to say the final words properly. By the way, I've already informed your parents about this. Both your father and mother are thoroughly dismayed by your actions. They said they won't help you in the future, no matter how much you struggle." Patrick sobbed out loud. It seems the cost of his affair was quite high. "So, goodbye. From now on, we'll communicate through a lawyer, so this is the last time I'll talk to you. Enjoy your life with your mistress." As Patrick let out a cry of despair over the phone, I pressed the end call button without concern. Later, I filed for compensation through a lawyer for both of them. Patrick had used up all his money, except for the living allowance he gave me, so it seems he had to take out loans to pay the compensation. He pleaded for help from his parents, but both refused to provide any support. Moreover, Patrick had used up all his paid leave days to go on dates with Amy, and when that wasn't enough, he frequently skipped work without notice. This severely impacted his job evaluation and effectively cut off any future promotions. Despite his casual affairs, Patrick was shocked to be divorced by me. He became unable to focus at work and was likely facing a demotion. If he was so shocked, he shouldn't have cheated in the first place. Now, he struggles to make ends meet due to his debts. I heard all this from his parents, who showed no sympathy for their own son. Amy, too, was kicked out of her house after her family found out about the affair. Her family, who seemed to be reasonable people, sent me a letter of apology through a lawyer. According to the letter, they disowned Amy and kicked her out without mercy. Amy used up her savings and still had to take out loans to pay the compensation. However, she borrowed from a particularly shady place, and just paying the interest is all she can manage. Currently, she's working multiple jobs to pay off her debts, but such a life doesn't seem sustainable. Well, whatever happens to her is none of my concern. It turns out Amy was initially after Patrick's money, which was abundant only because I was paying for the house mortgage. Now divorced, Patrick no longer has such financial freedom. Her plans were doomed from the start. I thought they would marry after our divorce, but surprisingly, that didn't happen. Amy blamed Patrick for her predicament and broke up with him. In the end, Patrick lost his family, his mistress, his money, his home, and his car. He now lives alone in a rundown apartment, seemingly on the verge of collapse. Meanwhile, I live peacefully with my 2 sons. Selling the house and car brought in a good sum of money, allowing us to buy a modestly sized, well-maintained used house. It's smaller than our previous home but was well cared for by its previous owners, almost unbelievably pristine for a used house. The boys seem to like their new home, living each day with smiles. I'm off, Mom. See you, Mom. Have a good day, both of you. As I watched my sons leave for school with smiles, I wished in my heart for our happy days to continue forever.